Hi. So, do you have an I-751 interview coming up and your spouse has gone no contact with you? You are now worried, scared that you don't know how you can go to your interview without your spouse, if you can even be approved without your spouse. Well, this is the video for you. I will be going over the ways that you can still save your I-751 interview application and still be approved. Okay, that's what we are going to be talking about today. I am attorney Lillian Chukura. I'm a US based immigration lawyer, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the US immigration law system. So let's jump right in. I have multiple things that I can, um, you know, multiple steps that you can take to figure out what your options are. Okay. Number one, if your spouse decides that they are no longer either interested in the marriage, you two have separated, divorced, or it's time for the interview and they basically say, I don't want anything to do with you or this interview. Well, you have options. Okay. So we're going to go through the steps and the options with you. The first thing you need to do, number one, is assess your situation. Okay. You need to figure out what is your situation. Is it that you filed jointly with your spouse and now you two are not divorced and you don't know what to do? Or have you two filed for divorce? Right? And you're just waiting for the divorce to be finalized because your options are going to depend on these things, right? Now, two, let's talk about what those options are because when you have an interview coming up, especially if you filed your I-751 jointly with your spouse. Okay, you filed jointly. Now there's an interview. Your spouse is a no-show. Your marriage has basically broken down. And what are your options? Well, one option, if you are not actually able to attend the interview, for example, if you are out of town or out of the country at the time, you can ask for a reschedule if you have another appointment that you cannot get out of. So let's say you have a doctor's appointment that's like very important that you cannot miss, then you can ask USCIS to reschedule your interview. If you have a work um, engagement where you have to travel for work or you have to make a huge presentation for work, you're not really able to miss that day, you can also ask for a reschedule. So, in order to reschedule your appointment, you have to have a good reason that USCIS recognizes. And you have to ask for that reschedule ahead of time. Okay. So, not the week before, not days before, because here's the thing, you can ask for a reschedule, but if your reschedule request is not approved, if USCIS does not send you notification saying, hey, we have approved your request to reschedule this appointment, your appointment is still on. You still have to go to the interview. Okay, so you want to do it ahead of time because you really don't want to miss the appointment. All right, making a request to reschedule on its own is not the same as having a reschedule approved. All right, so you have to wait for the reschedule to be approved before you can decide you can't go to your interview. Because if you don't show up to the interview, the officer has the right to just deny your case and say that you abandoned it because you didn't show up to your interview. All right, so remember, you can reschedule, have a good reason for the reschedule, and do the reschedule ahead of time. So let's say you get the notice today and you know you can't make it on that day, please do the reschedule as soon as you know you can't make it so you give yourself enough time for USCIS to approve your reschedule. The second thing you can do is attend the interview, right? Instead of rescheduling, you can attend the interview. But now let's talk about the fact that you filed jointly with your spouse, right? You filed that application jointly with your spouse, and now you're going in by yourself. You're going to the interview by yourself. What can you do, right? So for an I-751, there are waivers available. All right. So you have the option to file jointly with your spouse or to file under one of these waivers. And the waivers are abuse, divorce, or exceptional hardship. All right. So if you are able to prove that there was abuse during your marriage and that's what that led to your marriage breaking down, then the officer can still approve your I-751 even without your spouse showing up at the interview. If you and your spouse are divorced and you have the divorce decree, the officer can still approve your I-751 based on the divorce waiver. Now, there's also the exceptional or extreme hardship waiver. If you can show that there wasn't abuse, we're not divorced, but if you deny my application, I will suffer extreme hardship. USCIS officers can still approve your I-751. But here's the thing, just because you qualify for a waiver is not enough, because you still have to meet the requirements of the I-751, which is showing that you and your spouse entered into your marriage in good faith and you two continue to build a life together. All right. That is the key, right? The officer wants to make sure, one, that you entered your marriage in good faith, and two, you are either filing jointly with your spouse or you are filing under a waiver. Now, if it's 2 days before your interview, your abusive spouse decides they're not going to attend the interview with you, they basically shut you out, will not talk to you, what do you do when you go to the interview, right? Because you file jointly, the interview notice says that you and your spouse are supposed to show up for the interview. What can you do to change it from filing jointly to a waiver? Well, it's really, really simple, right? You go to your interview, you get in there, the officer is going to ask you a few questions, and you are going to tell the officer that you want to change your application from filing jointly to filing based on a waiver, depending on the waiver that you qualify for. So if it's a divorce waiver, you are giving the officer the divorce decree, right? If it is abuse waiver, you are giving the officer evidence of the abuse. Right? Sometimes officers will take it upon themselves once they see that your spouse is not there with you. The officers will take it upon themselves to ask you, are you filing based on a waiver, right? They may ask you, is there a divorce decree? And if there's no divorce decree, then they will ask, has there been abuse in the marriage? They will try to get the information they need to make a decision on the case. So it's really important that you are prepared mentally before you go in there, because the officer is going to ask you questions to figure out if they can still approve your case. And if you are not prepared to say, yes, there was abuse, or yes, we're divorced now, or okay, no, there wasn't abuse and we're not divorced, but I will suffer extreme hardship, and this is the evidence to show that I will suffer extreme hardship, the officer cannot do anything, right? So you have to be prepared, okay? And I'll talk about how to prepare for the interview. That will be step 4, all right? So now we've evaluated your situation. We figured out, okay, there was abuse. You can file under the abuse waiver, or you are finally, your divorce is final, or you don't have either of those two things, but you will suffer extreme hardship. Now, what do you need? Right? Now, let's talk about what documentation you will need for each of those situations. It is so important that you go through that first step of assessment, the second step of figuring out where, what your next step should be. Is it to reschedule, to show up to the interview and tell the officer you're filing based on a waiver, right? So those are your options there. So if you have gotten through those two steps, now you want to prepare for the interview by figuring out what documentation to actually present. So when you filed your I-751, I'm sure you sent in documentation to prove that your marriage is real, that you and your spouse were living together if you were still together at the time. When you're going to your interview, you should still bring additional documentation of your relationship. Because now, because your spouse is not there, the officer may want more stuff, right? The officer, your spouse not showing up after you file jointly is going to raise a red flag for the officer. So they may ask you more questions about your relationship, more questions about your spouse, right? So you want to have those additional documentation of your relationship, of communication between you and your spouse. So if you two text a lot, get your text messages, right? If the text messages show the abuse, that's even an added bonus because now you can use the text messages to not just say, hey, our marriage is real, but also, hey, this is the abuse that I have been going through. This is the verbal abuse. This is the psychological abuse that I have been going through. If part of the abuse is physical and you had, called the police, there was a restraining order, you need to take proof of those to the interview. Okay. So if there was a restraining order between you and your spouse, you went to court, you got a restraining order, or you called the police, but you didn't go the extra step of getting a restraining order, that is still okay. Right. So you need to take documentation of that to your interview because, again, you are now changing to a waiver. You want to make it easy for the officer to approve your case. Right? You want to make it easy for the officer to realize, yes, there is abuse here because there's all these police reports. If you do not have police reports, that is okay, right? Because abuse can be more than physical. If, let's say, for example, you did have physical abuse, you never called the police, however, there's medical records to show the abuse, these pictures to show the abuse. There were text messages where your spouse may have been apologizing for, hitting you or anything like that. Those are evidence that you can use to prove the abuse. The divorce waiver is the easiest because all you have to do is to get divorced and for the divorce to be final. And you just have to take the divorce certificate with you to the interview. All right. For the extreme hardship, you have to show evidence of extreme hardship, right? It's not just, oh, if I don't get my green card, I'm not going to, I'm just going to go back to my home country and be there, right? So you need to show that you will suffer, right? Extreme hardship is about suffering. How will you suffer if you had to leave the US? So if you have children in the US that you may have to leave behind, that is evidence of your suffering or potential suffering. All right. So it is so important that you really think about what documents you're going to present to prove one of these waivers if your spouse is not going to show up with you. And then finally, you need to prepare for the interview. Okay. Once you have the documents, that's great, but you have to prepare yourself here mentally for the interview. Because guess what? If you get in there and you're not able to answer questions, you're not able to, articulate yourself, that can lead to the officer, having more questions for you, having confusion about your case. You do not want the officer to be confused about your case. Okay. You want to make it easy for the officer. So if you get in there and the officer asks you, let's say it's your husband that didn't show up, and they ask you, what's your husband's name? What's your husband's date of birth? When was the last time you saw your husband? When was the last place you and your husband lived together? If you are not able to answer any of these questions to the officer as soon as they're asking it, that's going to raise some red flags. So you need to be prepared and figure out techniques to calm yourself down. Because in these situations, you are going to be nervous. You are going to be scared. You may even be shaken. It's okay. But you need to figure out a technique to calm yourself down internally so that you can still hear the question that's being asked by the officer and you can still respond to the question that's being asked. Okay. So it's not just knowing, what questions and all of that, but figuring out ways to calm yourself down. Okay. Preparing with the knowledge part of things, but preparing psychologically because it is going to mess with you. You may get in there and the officer asks you 2 questions and that's it, right? Or you may get there and the officer asks you hundreds of questions. So you have to be prepared for each situation because you want to make sure that you do not let your nervousness, that you do not let the fact that you are afraid basically mess up your chances of getting your I-751 approved. All right. So let's just go through again. You need to assess your situation. You need to figure out which option is available to you. So either you reschedule, you have an abuse waiver, divorce waiver, exceptional or extreme hardship waiver. And then you need to figure out what documentations you have available to you to prove that your marriage is real and to prove one of the waivers. Okay. And then finally, you need to prepare yourself mentally for the interview and, have knowledge of your particular case, right? Of your spouse, of your life together, and be able to regulate yourself internally to be able to answer questions to the officer and not let your fear take over. Okay. You're going to have fear. Okay. You're going to be scared. I'm not going to tell you, oh, just it's okay. There's nothing to worry about. You are going to be afraid. You are going to be worried. But do not let that mess up your interview. Okay, figure out a way to regulate yourself so that you can still answer the questions and you can still basically articulate to the officer, yes, my marriage was real. However, because of these situations, because of abuse, because of the divorce, because of whatever it is, our marriage didn't work out. But it was real. We did plan on building a life together. It's just not working out the way that I planned it. Okay. So those are the things to keep in mind. And remember, by the way, if you are getting value out of this video, okay, hit the like button, subscribe if you want more videos like this. I truly appreciate that. And just know, right? Just know the officer is there to get the information they need, right? When it comes to your interview, the officer is just trying to get the information they need to make a decision. So most of the time, before you even get in the room, the officer already they've done their background checks. They have done their background checks. I had an interview recently in a similar situation where the officer literally was like, I've done my background checks. I just have a couple questions, and literally asked a couple questions and was ready to make a decision. So it's so important that you also know what's in your background. Okay. So when the officer is asking you questions, when you're assessing your situation, you need to think about not just, okay, is my spouse going to go to the interview with me, but what evidence is out there? What things are out there that are public information that can be used against me? It might be public information about your spouse, public information about you, right? What is out there that could potentially affect me? So, something that always seems to come up because, again, background checks, right? Is criminal history, criminal activity, police interactions, all right? Those will always always come up in the background checks. All right. So if there's been an arrest involving your spouse during the time that you two were together, and they put in, the arrest was based on domestic violence, and the person that they abused was someone else that's not you, and they said that person is their fiance or their spouse or their, girlfriend, that's going to affect your case. All right. So it may not even be something you did that affects it, but you need to know what's out there. Has your spouse had police interactions? And if they have, was it during your marriage or after you two have already decided to go your separate ways? Or is that part of the abuse, right? Is the seeing other people doing all of those other things, is that part of the abuse? Like, are they blaming you? Are they saying you're the reason that I'm seeing other people because you're not doing X, Y, and Z? Because that's part of the abuse. So it's so important that you assess your particular situation. And to assess your particular situation, you may not even know how to do that. And that's where having an immigration lawyer, speaking to an immigration lawyer, is so, so important. Okay. If you know that your spouse is not going to show up and you don't know where to go, right? You've watched this video, you don't know what the next step should be, that the next step should be having a consultation with an immigration lawyer to see what your particular options would be. All right. And if you want to do that with me, you can schedule a strategy session by going to my website, lilylegal.com, or by calling my office at 508-443-1788. All right. So I do see a question in the comments, and I will go ahead and respond to those now. Hi, Wilma. Thank you for joining me. Let me see what your question is. What happens next, or what can I do if progress of my case had 1 week and changed to case taking a little longer? Well, I'm guessing you're talking about you're on your USCIS account, and it says, this is the time frame, and then it got a little longer. It doesn't really mean there's anything wrong with your case. Okay, those are estimates. All right, those are estimates. It doesn't mean that they're actually going to take that long or that they're going to be shorter, longer. It's just an estimate. All right, so it's not that something is wrong with your case. It's not that, there's anything you have to do. As long as the general processing time is, as long as your case is still within the general processing time that USCIS puts on their website, you are still fine. It's just on the online account, they try to give you a little extra information. But again, it's just telling you this is how long we think it's going to take now based on the caseload we have. All right. So just know that's where that's going. It's not that your case is taking longer. It's just based on the caseload they have. This is how long it's taking them, or this is how long they think is going to take them to complete your particular case. Okay. So it's going to fluctuate. There's not really much you can do about that fluctuation, but you can just look at the general processing time that they put on their website to see if it's still within that same time frame. If it's within the general processing time, you are good. If it's outside of that normal processing time, then you would need to contact USCIS. You can either do Ask Emma on the website or call the 800 number so that you can get more information. And sometimes you can even do a service request that basically says, hey, it's past the normal processing time. What's going on here? When can I expect a response here? And those service requests will then be forwarded to the officer, and they will be able to respond typically by email. Okay. Hi, Raul. So those are the only questions I see. If you do have questions and you're still with me, please go ahead and put them in the comments. I am more than happy to respond. All right. Okay. Kasmita is asking how long after biometrics you hear from USCIS. So biometrics is literally the first step. Okay, so you get your receipt notice, you get your biometrics notice. USCIS cannot actually start processing any forms that you send them. So the I-751, the 485, whatever you send them that requires biometrics, they will not be able to start processing them until you do the biometrics. So the biometrics is the first step. All right. So basically, you do the biometrics and then you wait. It's going to take some time, depending on the application that you have pending. Okay. So if you have a work authorization pending and the work authorization is based on adjustment of status, then it's probably going to take around 11 months. That's their current processing time. If you are excuse me, if you have a green card application pending, it is going to be specific to your area, but those are taking about a year and a half to complete processing. But here's the thing, right? In between that, let's say, for example, you have a green card application pending and USCIS decides that they may want additional documentation from you to make a decision whether to schedule an interview or not. They're going to send you a request for evidence, right? How far into the process will they send that? It's going to be closer to the end of the processing, not the beginning. Now, if it's coming from the field office, it's going to be close to the end of the processing time. If it is coming from the service center, so if, for example, you have to send the response back to Lee's Summit, then it's with the service center. There's not really much you can do. The processing time is still the processing time. You're no closer to the end, but it makes it easier for the officer to get to the end and be like, yes, we have everything we need to approve this case, right? So how long is going to depend on the type of application and where you are in the process. All right. So you may get a request for evidence first, or you may get an interview notice. So if you're getting an interview notice, know you are close to the end of the process. Okay. And that's a good thing. You're almost done. You just have to go to your interview and you'll be fine. But it does take time after biometrics. All right. Oh, you're so welcome, Wilma. So welcome. Does anyone else have any questions? I do try to leave the back end of my lives just for your questions. So go ahead and ask me. Okay. Raul says, in my case, oh, okay. It's a marriage-based case. The work card got approved and the I-130 got a denial a week ago. I don't understand the denial reason. Please help. SOS. All right. Um, I will try to help. Excuse me. I will try to help. Okay. So if the I-131 got denied, sometimes it's because they don't feel that you should be able to travel, or you may have checked off the wrong box. So it depends on the reason. So if you look at your denial notice, it will tell you the exact reason that it was denied. So that's what you really need to look at. What was the exact reason that they gave you? In some situations, if someone is in immigration court proceedings, then they are definitely not getting an I-131 approved. For those that don't know, an I-131 is a travel permit. Okay, that allows you to travel outside of the US and be able to come back into the US without needing a visa. So that will parole you into the US. So if you are in immigration court, if you have certain criminal history, sometimes USCIS will not approve the I-131, but I will need to know the reason yours was denied. Feel free to reach out to me by scheduling a strategy session or by calling my office. And just, if I'm able to see the denial notice, I'll be able to give you more information on why um, it was denied and what you can do about it. Okay. Any other questions? Again, this is just your time to ask me questions, so feel free. Okay, so let's just do another recap of what you can do, right? What you can do if you have an I-751 interview and your spouse is not going with you, right? You two, your marriage has broken down, your spouse moved out, you don't even know where they are, you don't know what to do, and you filed the I-751 by yourself, or you filed the I-751 with your spouse and now the marriage is over. What can you do? One, assess your situation. Know what situation you're in, right? What can you do? What can you prove? Are you in the middle of a divorce? What is it exactly that you're in the middle of? Now you have options, right? You have the option of rescheduling your interview if it's just that your spouse is out of town or you are not available for the interview. um, you also have the options of the waivers, right? There's three waivers available for I-751s. Okay, so it's either you file jointly with your spouse, you go to the interview with your spouse, or you file based on a waiver, or you switch your application from jointly to a waiver. And if you're switching it from jointly to a waiver, the waivers that are available to you is abuse waiver, divorce waiver, and extreme hardship waiver. For the abuse waiver, you still have to prove that your marriage is real, that you entered into your marriage in good faith, you two plan to build a life together, it just didn't work out, and that you were abused during the marriage. All right. The divorce waiver is basically saying, yes, the marriage was real. However, things didn't work out. We ended up getting divorced. And here's the divorce decree showing that we are currently divorced. And then finally, you have the extreme hardship. Yes, the marriage was real. However, there was no abuse, there's no divorce. And if you don't approve this case, I would have extreme hardship. I will suffer extreme hardship and just proving the extreme hardship as well. Now, making sure that you have all the documentation, right? You have documentation to prove your marriage is real and documentation to prove whatever waiver option that's available to you. All right. And then finally, you want to prepare yourself mentally and knowledge wise for the interview, right? And what I mean knowledge wise is you need to, know that you will be asked about your spouse, right? Date of birth, place of birth, their name, right? If they've ever been arrested, especially if it happened during your marriage. Because again, there's background checks that are done on you and your spouse because you also have all the information they can possibly have on your case when you're doing the I-751. All right. So this is where it's really important that you prepare for the interview. And then preparing psychologically for the interview means knowing how to regulate yourself. You are going to be nervous. You are going to be scared. Okay? You are going to be nervous and you are going to be scared. So what can you do when the fear is taking over to take back control and be able to answer questions in the interview? You need to think about that. What can you do to mentally calm down and be able to hear the officer's questions and answer the questions? And don't let your nerves and your fear take over. Okay? So definitely prepare yourself. And Rahul, I'm going to put our email in the chat and you can send us an email. All right. And If it's something we can help you with, we'll reach out with more information, okay? All right, so you should have the email in the chat now. So, so yeah, thank you all so much. If you still have questions, please put them in the comments. Even if you're watching this on the replay, put your questions in the comments. I do go back and respond to all of them. So ask me your questions. I know you have them, especially after you watch this video, you're going to have questions. You're going to know, what can I do? What evidence in this situation or that situation? So ask in the comments, okay? Thank you all so much, and I will see you on the next one.